Hello and welcome to the final part of the ACE front-end technical intro. We're going to be doing a deep dive into our UI codebase. We're going to start by looking at our index.html mentioned in the last video. You can find that in source main web app www.
Here you see a lot of script tags, as I said, pulling in some external dependencies like the Angular UI router. You have some style sheets, some CSS, and all of the JavaScript files needed to run the application.
Now let's start out by looking in core at our app.js. Note that this isn't the same file we looked at earlier, which started our node server. Instead, this starts our Angular application. Now, here at the top,
this declares the global namespace. The name of this app is Ace Concerts. Then within it, you see we have our UI router declared. We have our spinner declared. So these are our external dependencies that we've declared. And then right here are the namespaces for the modules that we've built that are custom to our application. You see they kind of correspond to our file structure here: sections, components, and core. All right. And then right here, whenever the app starts, this actually runs the application. It's saying that we're going to go to the login page, and we're going to log out to the console.
we are starting up the application. All right, now let's go take a look at the sections folder. In this particular folder,
you have your views and controllers that have a defined route. So these are pages that you can navigate to in the app. You notice we only really have two pages. You have a login screen and a home screen. The reason we organize an Angular application like this by core, sections, and components is because it can give you a really good idea of what the app actually looks like and how it functions just by looking at the file structure. So sections, we see that we have two pages that we can navigate to. So let's crack open home.tpl, which stands for just template, .html, and then the home control. Let's look at the two of these side by side. It's really important. So this is that two-way data binding I was talking about earlier, where you can declare a variable over here in your controller, and then you can turn around and reference it over here in your view. So you notice how we have vm.venues. So I'm setting up this object right here, this venues object, which has a CSS class attached to it, either active or nothing, which is inactive. And when I click the show function, it can actually reference itself and make itself active. So these really are just two objects which are going to control the tabs over in your view. You're going to have a venues tab and a performance tab. So let's go over here to the view and see how those interact. We have our ng. ng is Angular specific directives. Basically, Angular specific things that already exist are built out. So this is a way Angular lets you manipulate the class programmatically. So we have ng class equals home, which is our home controller, dot venues. So we're looking at this object right here, dot class. So we're saying that the CSS class of this HTML element is equivalent to whatever this object is saying it is right now. So that's the two-way data binding. And then we have ng click. So this right here is Angular's way of saying, all right, I want to bind a function that you've declared over here, like this show function over here in a controller. I want to bind that to an on-click event. So whenever the user clicks on a particular element in the view, I want to fire off a function over here in the controller. So ng click equal home.venues.show. So whenever somebody clicks that tab, we're going to run this show function. Same goes for perfs, or performances. Whenever somebody clicks that upcoming performances right there, see the text, upcoming performances. So whenever somebody clicks that tag, then we're going to run this show function, right? Which makes the list of performances active. Okay, and then look down here. This right here is where we pull in our directives. So we have two tabs up top, one for venues, one for performances. And when you click them, one becomes active, the other becomes inactive. It's a hide and show kind of thing. And then down here, we actually have our list of upcoming performances and our list of available venues. Now you notice all that's here is a custom HTML tag which says performances and a custom HTML tag which is venues. So those two tags are directives. We have somewhere else in this app, we have a performances view and performances controller, which are bound together as a directive, and we're able to reference them on another view. And what this is saying, when Angular sees this tag, this is saying, hey, go out, find my performances directive that I've written, and pull it here. Put it here. Put the HTML here, and bind whatever HTML you put here to the corresponding performances controller that you've defined. Same with the venues. So let's actually go and let's take a look at these directives and see what they say. So if sections are the places where you can navigate to, like our home screen and our login screen, actually I'm going to back up for 1 second. Before we go and take a look at these directives, real quick, let's take a look at the route that is defined, because this is the home screen and you can navigate to it. So let's go look at home.js. Now, state provider is just the router that we're using. It's the Angular UI router that we're referencing. It's essentially saying that whatever page you're on is the current state of the application. So we're declaring right now this is the home state. So if I say state.go to home, that's where you'll be navigated to. URL is /home. Template URL. So this is the, how can I find the template that I'm going to use for this? How can I find the view? And this right here, www/section/home/view/home.tpl.html. That's this file right here that we were just looking at. Okay, so it says this piece of HTML, this view, let's bind this to this controller, home control, and we're going to reference it as home. So you notice back here, whenever we reference the class, right, or the show function, we said home.perfs. Well, that's actually established right here in the route definition. We're binding a controller to a view, and we're saying how we want to reference this controller. So we want to use this home control, which we've defined here in our controller, right, and that we've defined in our app.js namespace, right? Angular reads through your app.js at startup, goes and finds aceconcerts.sections.home, which is defined right here, right? aceconcerts.sections.home, and it says, okay, what do you need, module? Module says, I need this home controller, which is defined over here. So please pull in this home controller. And then Angular goes, okay,
I'll get you the home controller and all of the code that's associated with it. Now, it's important to note here that the only reason Angular has access to that home controller code is because we've brought it into our application via a script tag in the index.html. So it's important to remember that if you want to add a new JavaScript file to the app and have the app recognize it, you have to add it here in the index.html. Okay, so back to the home module and home controller. So Angular has looked through all of the JavaScript code that you've brought in, and it's found the home controller, and it injects it into the home module. And finally,
over here on my route, I'm binding the home controller to this view, to this home template. Okay, so that's a route, and that's how you do route definitions. Okay, so now back to home.html, and we're going to look at, going to actually go take a look at these two directives. So first we're going to go into components. So sections is where you keep the places in your app that you can navigate to, and components is where you keep all your directives, essentially where you keep your reusable components. So let's crack open the performances.js. This right here is just defining all the namespaces. So we have a directive, we have an add, which is this add modal, success, which is this file, this folder, the success folder, and the failure. So essentially, the performances.js, it's a simple file. It's just saying, hey, for this top level namespace, I want to pull in all of these other components. All right, so let's look at the directive. So instead of a route definition, like we have for home, right? Instead of a route definition, like we have over here for home, we have a directive definition. Does a very, very similar thing, right? So we have our top level namespace, performances directive. We're going to pull in the performances controller, and then we're going to say, hey, let's make a directive out of this, and I want to use this view, the performances.tpl.html, and I want to use this controller with it. That's all it means. Bind to controller is true. So we want to bind these two together. All right. So let's take a look at the performances.html and see what we can figure out between performance controller and performance.html. So there's a lot going on in this controller. There's a lot of code. There's a lot going on. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens when this thing starts up. Right. So we have some dependencies pulled in here at the top of the performances controller. We're going to be using a logger. We're going to be using a modal, which is just like a pop-up. We're going to be talking to the concert service. We're going to be using this thing called interval, and we're going to be using a spinner. Okay, and then you have some functions that are created, right? This is JavaScript, so you can assign functions to variables. So don't be scared when you see I have a variable and then boom. Oh yeah, okay. So this is also something to talk about. VM.
So you'll notice here at the top of our controller we have VM equals this. So this keyword in JavaScript can be very confusing, and it can actually behave differently depending on how it's called. But for simplicity's sake, let's treat it as if it's an object that has access to the global scope of whichever function it is called in. So in other words, if I use the keyword this in one function, it has access to that function's scope, but if I use it in a different function, it's referring to a different scope and therefore different variables entirely. Which is why we bind the top level this to the variable VM, so that all throughout the rest of the controller, when we say vm.something, we are referring to the same set of variables. If you'd like to learn some more about JavaScript's this keyword or JavaScript's lexical scoping, I've left some resources down in the description.
All right, so back to what's happening when you first start, or whenever you first navigate to this page. So notice the activate function is running, and then an interval is set up, and it says every 3,000 milliseconds, let's run this activate function once again. So this is JavaScript, right? So functions can be passed as variables. Functions can be treated as objects, essentially. So we can pass functions into another function. So it's essentially saying, like, hey, every 3 seconds, I want you to run this activate function. Let's see what it does. So this activate function is returning something. So you have the concert service, which is somewhere else in the app, right? It's a service. It's not a controller. Somewhere else in the app that we want to talk to, and we want to get the bookings, get the list of bookings from this concert service. So we're going to run this function, concert service dot get bookings, and then Once that's finished, once we get a response from the concert service, I want to do something else. So this is how promises work. See, JavaScript is non-blocking for I/O, which means if I'm making a REST call, if I'm making an AJAX request, then JavaScript isn't going to wait to hear back from it. So I don't want to assign whatever this gets back to vm.bookings until I've actually gotten a response back. That's all promises are. So the concert service.getBookings function returns a promise. And the syntax for that is you have a promise right here, which this returns, then I want to do something.
So going back, this
directive, this performances directive, when it starts up, is grabbing a list of bookings from this concert service and then showing it on the UI. So right here, we have an ng repeat, which is essentially a for loop that says I want to show for each booking in performances.bookings, which is defined over here, vm.bookings. So I'm going to do a for loop, and for every booking in performances.bookings, I want to put this onto the view. So whenever the performances tab is active, I want you to show the performances directive, which is essentially just a list of the performances. Same thing goes for the venue. When I click on the venues tab, I want you to show the list of venues. Yeah, and so that's directives in a nutshell, and how our homepage works in this application. All right, so last thing we're going to go look at is that concert service that the performances directive is utilizing. So this concert service is a JS file. It's a service. It's not a controller, so it doesn't have a view that it's bound to, and it doesn't have a route. It's not a directive, right? It's a service. This guy's responsibility is getting the data model and the data from the back end, so from our camel endpoints. So notice how I'm setting up this variable camel, which references the location of the camel endpoints, and I'm just adding on is the API endpoint location. So it's at the camel location / booking / venue / performances. I want to hit the bookings camel endpoints or the venues camel endpoints, and I'm creating an object from that. So $resource creates an endpoint for me based off of that location, which is the booking endpoint, and then I'm using some functions on that object to make my AJAX requests. So .save, .query, those are firing off AJAX requests and returning promises. You see the $promise converts the response into a promise, and so then we can start our promise chain with the .then and return res, which is just whatever response we get back from our server. So in this get bookings, that res is going to be hopefully the list of bookings that we get back from our server. All right, so at a high level, that's the application.
If you've made it this far, thanks for hanging in there, and feel free to reach out with any questions.